Imagine a game so confident, so unhinged, and so loud, it practically kicks open your front door, blows a confetti-filled air horn in your face, and asks, "Hey, wanna see my billion guns?" Welcome to Borderlands 3, the much anticipated follow-up to what many would call the gold standard of looter shooters. After 7 long years, Gearbox Software finally returned, and boy, did they have something to prove. New planets, new mechanics, new characters, and enough procedurally generated guns to arm a small intergalactic militia. And yet, somehow, even after all the hype, all the promise, and all the frankly spectacular skyboxes, seriously, look up every once in a while, we ended up with a game that felt like 2 radically different personalities sharing one very confused body. On the one hand, Borderlands 3 delivered arguably the best gunplay, deepest loot systems, and most addictive core gameplay loop the series has ever seen. On the other, well, let's just say the story was written by people that think yelling louder makes everything funnier. It's been a few years since launch, the dust has settled, and we're finally ready to break down exactly what Gearbox got right, and how the hell they managed to trip over their own clown-sized shoe so spectacularly when it came to storytelling. So, grab your favorite Jacobs shotgun, mute your Echo device, and join me on a galaxy-hopping, loot-scooping retrospective through the beautiful, brilliant mess that is Borderlands 3. The road to Borderlands 3 was long, loud, and somehow both overhyped and underwhelming. After Borderlands 2 dropped in 2012 and cemented its place as the king of chaotic looter shooters, Gearbox kinda vanished. There were spin-offs, the pre-sequel and Tales from the Borderlands, a couple of remasters, and a questionable detour into Battleborn. Fans were left wondering, where's the next real Borderlands? Turns out, it was slowly cooking. Full development began around 2015, with Gearbox moving the series to Unreal Engine 4. This brought new tech, better lighting, improved performance, and allowed the environmental detail to shine. And if there's one thing BL3 nails, it's vibrant, beautifully deranged worlds. The devs also upgraded the gun system, crafted new planets, and polished the loot loop with more depth and variety than ever before. On the gameplay front, Gearbox showed up. Movement was tighter, gunplay more refined, and the new character classes brought unmatched versatility. Internally, bold design choices promised a triumphant, genre-dominating return. And then came the writing. Somewhere between tuning loot tables and designing Prometheus' neon skyline, someone let the writers off the leash, and they came back with a script that reads like it was filtered through a Twitter thread, a vape cloud, and a fart joke. The fanbase, however, was still hyped. Marketing went full tilt. Trailers rained down like loot drops. But then, just before launch, Gearbox made a move that left fans choking on their Claptrap branded energy drinks. Borderlands 3 would launch as a 6-month Epic Games Store exclusive on PC. Backlash was instant. Steam loyalists erupted. Boycotts and refund threads flooded social media. Gearbox claimed it was just business. Fans called it a betrayal. The chaos, in a twisted way, was very on brand. The exclusivity deal didn't kill the game, but it did stain the launch window with a coat of PR sludge that could have been avoided. What should have been a universal victory lap turned into another example of corporate greed getting in the way of fun. But once the dust and the Steam release date finally settled, Borderlands 3 was out. And then the big question shifted from when was it coming to was it worth the wait? Ask anyone what makes Borderlands visually iconic, and the answer's obvious: cell shading. The series leans into its comic book aesthetic with bold outlines, flashy colors, and designs that feel like Mad Max met Saturday morning cartoons. Borderlands 3 doesn't reinvent that wheel, it just adds fresh, spiky rims and slaps neon lights on the undercarriage. Thanks to Unreal Engine 4, this is the best looking Borderlands to date. Everything pops brighter and sharper. Character models pack more detail, animations are smoother, and weapons have gone from clunky piles of polygons to designs you might actually want on your shelf, assuming you're into firearms built by drunken alien blacksmiths. But where Borderlands 3 truly flexes its visual muscles is in the skyboxes. Seriously, it's worth stopping every few minutes just to look up. Pandora's wastelands glow under a dying sun. Promethea dazzles with its cyberpunk skyline. Eden 6's jungles are dense and fog-covered, and Athena's feels like a postcard with cherry blossoms drifting through temple courtyards. Even Necrotafeo impresses with cosmic wreckage floating silently above. The artists clearly knew what they were doing. Each planet feels visually and culturally distinct. Enemy designs change from Maliwan's sleek shock troopers to Eden 6's mutated dinosaurs, to Necrotafeo's eerie guardians, matching their environments with flair. Small visual details shine too. Fire effects sizzle, radiation damage pulses neon green, explosions splash color and debris across the screen. While environmental destruction isn't fully dynamic, barrels still explode and cover shatters, keeping combat chaotic and visually engaging. It's rare for a game this committed to cartoonish excess to feel so polished, but Borderlands 3 pulls it off. Each planet feels like a page from an intergalactic comic book, each fight a panel of vibrant, explosive chaos. Just do yourself a favor, look up every now and then. Borderlands has always been loud. Really loud. Guns yell at you, explosions sound like fireworks gone wrong, and characters communicate exclusively through shouting or sarcasm. Borderlands 3 somehow makes that chaotic sonic identity even bigger and better. Let's start with the weapons. The sound design is punchy, satisfying, and wonderfully varied. Each gun, from Jacob's revolvers to Maliwan laser rifles, has its own distinctive audio personality. Torgue weapons don't just shoot, they scream explosions into existence. Hyperion's guns hum with corporate precision, and Dahl rifles sound crisp and military grade. The audio team clearly had a blast, and it makes gunfights infinitely more satisfying. Then there's the voice acting, usually a Borderlands highlight. Despite the script will absolutely roast later, the actors do their best to sell even the cringiest lines. Familiar voices return, new talent steps up, and while Ava might be an irritating character, that's not the actor's fault. They nailed exactly what the script demanded. It's just that the script demanded an annoying teenager. The real standout here is the music. Jesper Kyd, Michael McCann, Finishing Move, and Rayson Varner crafted a soundtrack that elevates every shootout, boss fight, and exploration sequence. Each planet gets its own musical identity. Synth-heavy beats for Prometheus' neon streets, earthy rhythms for Eden 6's swamps, and eerie electronica for Necrotophia's haunted ruins. Highlights include the adrenaline-pumping Neon Arterial, and the haunting ambience of the Floating Tomb. Even the theme for the game's main hub, Sanctuary 3, serves as the perfect unwinder before jumping headfirst back into the chaos. The soundtrack never fades into the background, propels the action, enhances tension, and punctuates each victory. Simply put, Borderlands 3's audio is top notch. Sure, the dialogue might make you want to mute your speakers occasionally, but every bullet fired, grenade exploded, and vault monster slain is a symphony of chaos worth savoring. When the writing falters, the sound design and music pick up the slack. Now if only they'd recorded fewer lines for Ava. Borderlands is, at its core, a looter shooter. And Borderlands 3 doubles down on both sides of that equation. The gunplay is fast, kinetic, and polished, easily the tightest the series had ever felt. New movement options like mantling and sliding make combat more fluid, while firefights push players to reposition constantly, counter varied enemy resistances, and manage their loadouts in real time. At its best, the game hits a flow state of non-stop action, reward, and adaptation. Structurally, it follows the familiar loop. Complete missions, kill enemies, grab loot, level up, spend skill points, repeat. But the pacing has been refined. Loot drops are more frequent, rare items are easier to spot, and boss fights are far more generous. Gearbox doesn't reinvent this formula. It just trims the fat and smooths out the friction points that once dragged it down. The galaxy-spanning maps are large and layered, with paths for vehicles, vertical exploration, and plenty of tucked-away secrets. While story missions remain relatively linear, the game encourages return visits for side quests, challenges, and loot hunting. Fast travel has been a welcome upgrade, letting you warp directly to discovered spawn points, even from other planets, cutting down on tedious backtracking. Sanctuary 3 acts as your hub between planets, and unlike past hubs, it's one you'll revisit often. It houses quest givers, vendors, the lost loot machine, room customization, and functions as a breather between major beats. It's also where the game's upgraded systems come together, giving you space to respec, re-equip, and regroup. Mechanical feedback is where Borderlands 3 really shines. Guns feel punchy, elemental effects are loud and satisfying, and enemy behavior is better telegraphed than ever. Status effects like cryo and radiation have clear visual tells, making crowd control easier to manage. Even when the writing stumbles, the core combat rarely does. That said, pacing stutters in the late game, as health pools swell and mayhem modifiers stack, and counters lean more into bullet sponge territory. Some builds start to feel mandatory, especially in endgame content, and not every class scales equally without specific gear or synergies. Borderlands 3 features 4 playable Vault Hunters, each more flexible and mechanically refined than any before. While the game's tone struggles with maturity, its class design is arguably Gearbox's most polished to date. Each character offers distinct skill trees, multiple action skills, and build paths that encourage experimentation without punishing off-meta choices. Amara, the Siren, is a brawler mage hybrid. Her astral projection skills hit hard and feel responsive, making her ideal for close-range combat and crowd control, whether you lean into elemental stacking or raw brute force. Amara's synergy with elemental weapons makes her a powerful force. Still, her late-game performance tends to rely on repetitive status effect loops. Flag, the Beastmaster, brings pets into the spotlight with a playstyle focused on crits, stealth, and ranged precision. His fadeaway ability is a standout, especially when paired with high damage sniper builds. While flexible, Flag's biggest drawback is pet AI, still inconsistent and occasionally ineffective in chaotic encounters. And always in the fucking way of any conversations. Mose, the Gunner, is built for destruction. Her mech, Iron Bear, can dish out massive damage and absorb punishment, making her a tanky powerhouse. She excels with splash damage and ammo regen builds, offering a traditional but satisfying rhythm. However, Iron Bear's viability fluctuates depending on build and mayhem level, and some skill trees feel more limited than others. Lastly, Zane, the Operative, is the most technical pick. He can equip 2 action skills at once, trading grenades for utility. His builds revolve around clones, drones, and speed, rewarding strategic placement and timing. Zane has the highest skill ceiling of the 4, but his complexity may turn off players seeking a simpler DPS path. At launch, Gearbox put a clear emphasis on build diversity. Each Vault Hunter supports viable solo and co-op play, and action skills stay relevant into the late game. Post-launch patches addressed early balance issues like Flag's damage scaling and Zane's weak clone. And overall, the class system feels robust and rewarding. Narratively though, not so much. Despite their mechanical strength, the Vault Hunters are largely voiceless outside of barks and quips. They're absent from cutscenes and barely acknowledged in the story, which squanders the chance to develop them as actual characters. It's a missed opportunity, but as playable tools of mayhem, they're damn effective. Borderlands 3's arsenal is where the game shows off, and not just in sheer numbers, though yes, the marketing buzz about a billion guns isn't entirely exaggerated. What sets the weapon design apart is how distinct, weird, and mechanically diverse these guns actually are. They're not just loot, they're experiments. Gearbox took the foundation laid by previous titles and doubled down on personality. A Jacobs revolver feels nothing like a Malo 1 plasma rifle, and a TD or SMG isn't just something you reload, it's something you throw like a tantrum, only to watch it turn into a bouncing turret or flying bomb mid-combat. Each manufacturer brings its own identity to the table, and this time, those identities are more refined than ever. Jacob's guns reward precision, with critical hits that ricochet into nearby enemies. Malo 1 emphasizes elemental versatility, often requiring a short charge up in exchange for high status effect chances. TDR weapons continue their classic throw to reload gimmick, now adding bizarre behaviors depending on model. Some grow legs, others explode in different elemental blasts. Torgal's all in on splash damage, letting players tag enemies with sticky explosives and detonate them at will. Dahl maintains its military grade approach with switchable fire modes, offering tactical control over fire rate and handling. Hyperion weapons stabilize as you shoot, with many featuring front-facing shields, promoting defensive, hold-your-ground playstyles. Vladov weapons emphasize blistering fire rates and large magazine capacities, often featuring underbarrel attachments like miniature rockets or shotguns. Two newer additions round things out. Atlas, returning from the original Borderlands, uses tracking darts and small bullets to lock onto targets and maintain consistent pressure. And COV, replacing Bandit, abandons reloading entirely in favor of an overheat system. The former feels like a cheat code in crowd control scenarios, while the latter leans into chaotic sustained output at the cost of precision. Layered atop all of this is the elemental system: fire, shock, corrosive, cryo, and radiation. Each element has a clear role. Fire burns health, shock tears through shields, corrosive eats armor, cryo slows and freezes, and radiation causes chain reactions among clustered enemies. Combined with build-specific perks and bonuses, the element system turns your loadout into a toolkit, and choosing the right one matters more than ever, especially at higher mayhem levels. Guns feel good too. There's a real weight to the shooting. Recoil patterns are tighter, ADS speeds more responsive, and reload animations feel slick across the board. Even common green weapons early in the game have just enough identity to keep combat feeling engaging, and while legendary weapons eventually flood the endgame, especially with mayhem and world events active, the creativity behind their design still stands out. These aren't just stronger guns, they're stranger ones. Guns that shoot saw blades, guns that sprout legs, guns that sing, teleport, or explode into clones of themselves. In a genre often content with cosmetic variants and incremental upgrades, Borderlands 3's weapons are anything but passive. They're central to the game's rhythm, personality, and buildcraft. Whether you're chasing synergy with your skill tree or just want to see what weirdness the next chest contains, the gunplay remains the most consistently satisfying part of the Borderlands formula, and this entry executes on that vision better than any before it. One of Borderlands 3's most immediate improvements is scope. For the first time, players leave Pandora's dusty chaos behind and explore a handful of distinct planets, each with its own tone, biome, and enemy ecosystem. While the campaign still unfolds linearly, the jump between worlds gives the game a sense of scale and variety that its predecessors lacked. Pandora returns as the familiar frontier, filled with skags, psychos, and other old favorites. It's intentionally basic, a known quantity that sets the stage before the real expansion begins. Promethea shifts gears fast, plunging players into a war-torn metropolis under siege by Maluan's private army. Combat here gets more tactical, with enemies using shields, elemental resistance, and drone support. Visually, it's Blade Runner on a budget, neon-lit ruins and corporate carnage. Eden 6 is a grimy jungle planet teeming with aggressive wildlife, vertical exploration, and decaying corporate infrastructure. Jabbers, Saurians, and the ever-present Children of the Vault keep players on their toes, favoring flanking and ambush tactics. Then there's Atenas, and while we only spend an hour here during the main story, it's in my opinion one of the most memorable locations due to how unique it looks. It's also where we first run into the writing disaster that is Ava, but more on that later. And finally, Necrotafeo delivers on the long-teased mystery of the Iridians. It's fragmented, alien, and loaded with cryptic architecture. The Guardians here behave more like combat puzzles than basic enemies, though their limited variety wears thin during extended firefights. Enemy variety also sees a noticeable step up from previous entries, which often relied on recycled models and stat swap bandits. In Borderlands 3, enemy design feels more deliberate. Maluan units bring coordinated tactics, elemental shielding, and drone backup to the fight. The wildlife on Eden 6 fights with chaotic aggression and high mobility, forcing players to adapt positioning constantly. Even the bandits have more personality this time around, with regional and factional differences that slightly tweak their behavior and gear. Still, while the enemies look and function more distinctly, the AI remains a weak link. Most foes stick to predictable loops: charge, flank, retreat, repeat. It's a step up in polish, but not in intelligence. Sure, the game modernizes its enemy variety in presentation and design, but its moment-to-moment AI still lags behind more reactive shooters. The game introduces a broad range of challenges and collectibles designed to reward exploration and give players reasons to engage with the map beyond its main objectives. In a game so focused on moment-to-moment action, these systems act as a slower, more methodical layer, filling space between firefights with meaningful side content, and for the most part, they work. First off, Typhon logs are scattered recordings from Typhon de Leon, the supposed first Vault Hunter, and they inject a surprising amount of backstory into the universe. Once all logs in a region are collected, they reveal a Typhon Dead Drop, a special chest with higher quality loot. The real draw, though, is the narrative texture. Typhon is a caricature, sure, but his reflections offer lore the main story largely ignores. It's one of the few times Borderlands 3 stops screaming and tries to actually say something. Then there's Dead Claptraps. These are more of a straightforward scavenger hunt. Found across every zone, they consist of broken robot parts you can return to Claptrap aboard Sanctuary 3 to help him build a friend. The humor leans hard into the series' usual forced quirkiness, but the collectibles themselves push players off the beaten path. Rewarding environmental curiosity. It's not groundbreaking, but it does help make the world feel more lived in than previous entries. Crimson radio towers offer light platforming challenges that make full use of Borderlands 3's new movement mechanics, mantling, sliding, and improved verticality. Reaching these pirate radio antennas disables COV propaganda and contributes to an area's overall completion. Hijack targets, meanwhile, are parked enemy vehicles hidden throughout the world. Stealing them unlocks unique vehicle parts, like turrets, engines, and chassis, which players can use for vehicle customization via Catcherite stations. Then there are the recurring mini-boss takedowns, legendary hunts, and targets of opportunity. These optional fights drop decent loot and often feature unique mechanics that offer short bursts of challenge between story beats. They won't blow you away, but they help vary the rhythm. All of these systems, taken together, form a patchwork of distractions that, while not always deep, enrich the pacing. They add friction in a good way, encouraging exploration without demanding it. For players chasing immersion, it's enough to elevate Borderlands 3's world beyond combat arenas and fetch quests. Still, there's an undeniable sense of quantity over depth. These activities rarely evolve. Once you've tackled a few Typhon logs or Crimson radios, the rest feel like busy work. There's a missed opportunity here to tie these more directly into character arcs or emergent storytelling, rather than leaving them as mechanical checklists. Lastly, the game carries over the long-term gameplay challenges from BL2's badass system, though they're more subdued this time. Challenges like kill X skags or deal elemental damage are still being tracked, but they mostly just reward Iridium and feel disconnected from the core loop. They exist to encourage varied playstyles, but they're presented as background noise rather than an integral part of progression. Iridium is also no longer needed to buy storage deck upgrades. They've instead been repurposed to be spent at Crazy's shop for cosmetic unlocks. The game introduces a handful of quiet but meaningful additions to its core formula. Nothing game-changing, but smart quality of life tweaks that polish the edges and streamline play. Chief among them is the Lost Loot Machine. Tucked away aboard Sanctuary 3, it solves a long-standing gripe. Launching a legendary item vanish through geometry or get lost in the particle chaos of a boss fight. Now, high-rarity loot you miss is automatically recovered and stored. It's a small change, but a player-friendly one that eases frustration, especially on higher difficulties where loot is overabundant. Another under-the-hood improvement is the loyalty reward system. As you use weapons from a specific manufacturer, you'll occasionally get gear in the mail tied to that preference. The game doesn't make a big deal out of it, but that subtle reinforcement gives the loop a bit more direction without hand-holding. As mentioned earlier, vehicle customization also gets a boost. Instead of a handful of fixed options, you can now unlock vehicle parts by hijacking enemy rides and scanning them at catch-a-ride stations. It's still a lightweight feature. Vehicles aren't a major focus, but being able to tweak your ride's weapons, wheels and gadgets adds welcome variety, especially in early game exploration where you're not fast traveling everywhere yet. On the traversal side, mantling and sliding are low-key improvements that punch above their weight. They modernize movement, make platforming less clunky, and tie directly into world challenges like the Crimson Radio. It's not reinventing the wheel, but it does bring Borderlands a little closer to contemporary shooter standards in terms of fluidity. Individually, none of these systems redefine Borderlands 3, but collectively, they reflect a smarter, more player-conscious design approach. Gearbox clearly took notes from past games and patched over some of the genre's small but persistent annoyances. These additions don't demand attention, but you'd notice their absence if they weren't there. And that, in a series this chaotic, is a quiet win worth acknowledging. Borderlands 3 picks up some years after the events of Borderlands 2, in a galaxy still recovering from the chaos unleashed by Handsome Jack and the opening of the Vault on Pandora. The game opens with a familiar premise. You are a newly recruited Vault Hunter, arriving on Pandora to join the Crimson Raiders, led by returning characters like Lilith, Tannis and Ellie. Your mission is, unsurprisingly, to beat the bad guys to a vault and secure its power. The new antagonists this time around are the Calypso twins, Tyreen and Troy, twin siblings who lead the Children of the Vault, a cult of weaponized bandits worshipping the vaults as religious artifacts and the twins as demigods. Tyreen is a siren who drains power from others, while Troy, her parasitic twin, shares that power through an undefined and vaguely explained link. Their goal is to unlock as many vaults as possible, absorb their power, and transcend to godhood. After a short prologue on Pandora, the narrative expands to multiple planets: Promethea, Athenas, Eden 6, and eventually Necrotofeo, each holding clues or keys to the location of the Great Vault. The Crimson Raiders set up shop aboard Sanctuary 3, a spaceship that acts as your central hub, ferrying you from one crisis to the next. The journey takes you through war-torn corporate conflicts, cultist invasions, and Vault Guardian awakenings, all loosely tied together by the overarching race against the Calypsos. Along the way, several familiar faces return. Claptrap is still here, and still insufferable. Tannis remains the scientific wildcard. Moxie and Marcus play their support roles, but Zed is absolutely nowhere to be found. Maya, Brick, Mordecai, and Tiny Tina show up. The only one gets a meaningful arc, and even that ends abruptly. Some new characters are introduced as well, most notably Ava, a young siren apprentice under Maya, who becomes increasingly central as the plot unfolds. The central drama hinges on a series of power shifts. The Calypso succeed in killing key characters and draining power from various vault monsters, gradually increasing their influence across a galaxy. Lilith loses her siren powers early on, rendering her more of a symbolic leader, while Tannis and Ava take more active roles in deciphering Iridian technology and controlling siren energy. The player's job, as usual, is to travel to various hotspots, fight off waves of enemies, and recover pieces of Iridian tech or destroy ancient constructs to prevent the Calypsos from achieving their goal. Ultimately, everything converges on Necrotofeo, the ancient Iridian homeworld and hidey hole of Typhon de Leon. He informs us that Pandora is actually the Great Vault, and that Elpis is the key, but luckily, With our 4 vault keys, we can repower the machine that sealed away the universe-threatening beast known as the Destroyer, the very same the original crew fought at the end of the first game. In the final act, Tyreen merges with a part of the creature, becoming Tyreen the Destroyer, a final boss that must be defeated to prevent universal annihilation. After a lengthy boss fight and a few lines of wrap-up dialogue, Lilith sacrifices herself by reigniting her siren powers to stop the Elpis-sized threat once and for all. The game ends with her branding the moon with a flaming Firehawk sigil. Presumed dead but mythologized as a martyr, Ava, newly empowered and now inexplicably more central than the player themselves, is put in charge of the Crimson Raiders. Credits roll, and the galaxy remains intact, though not necessarily better off. If the gameplay represents the franchise at its most polished, its story represents it at its most self-defeating. It's not just poorly written, it's fundamentally misaligned with what the rest of the game is doing well, where the combat is responsive, deliberate, and highly tuned. The writing is scattered, juvenile, and constantly undermining its own stakes with a relentless barrage of failed punchlines. The biggest narrative issue is by far tone. Borderlands has always walked a tightrope between absurdist humor and legitimate sci-fi world building. Borderlands 2 largely succeeded at this by anchoring its absurdity with the threat of Handsome Jack, a villain who was funny and cruel, charismatic and terrifying. He allowed the writing to veer into dark comedy without collapsing into total farce. Borderlands 3 has no such anchor. The Calypso twins, Tyreen and Troy, are written as streamers turned cult leaders, but the game does nothing to explore that idea beyond the surface. Their characterization is thin, their goals are shallow, and their personalities boil down to loud and smug. Tyreen in particular is meant to be intimidating, but spends the entire campaign posturing through echo recordings with the nuance of a B-tier Discord troll. The game insists on their power and danger, but rarely shows it in a way that resonates. Instead, they rely on repeated threats, forced quips, and monologues that feel like they were written to mimic Jack's cadence without understanding why he worked. More frustrating is the game's complete mishandling of Ava, who ends up becoming the accidental centerpiece of the narrative. Introduced as Maya's apprentice, Ava is brash, impatient, and constantly angry, but never in a way that feels earned or rounded. Her presence derails key story moments, particularly Maya's death, which is used less to develop Ava's arc and more to shortcut her into plot relevance. By the end of the game, she's inexplicably leading the Crimson Raiders, despite the player, who just saved the galaxy, being treated as a background element. Her characterization is not only thin, it's grating. And worse, the game seems unaware of how disliked she is. It doesn't help that the player's character, regardless of class, is narratively passive. Dialogue options are minimal, decisions are pre-scripted, and even major plot shifts unfold without your input. You're not the protagonist so much as the delivery system for actual protagonists like Ava, Tannis, and Lilith to move the plot forward. The game's pacing also suffers because of this. The story is built around a series of fetch quests and planetary detours, most of which are justified by vague references to Iridian artifacts or vault keys. Each location is interesting from a gameplay perspective, but narratively, they often feel like extended stalls. Prometheus Civil War, Eden 6's dynastic squabbles, and Athena's Monastery Siege all offer potential for grounded world building, but the writing rarely capitalizes on any of it. Instead, major events are undercut by constant jokes, interruptions, or tone-deaf voice lines. Deaths aren't mourned, they're glossed over. Plot twists aren't shocking, they're memed into oblivion. There's also a distinct structural disconnect between the game's themes and its presentation. The story gestures towards ideas of power, influence, cultism, and what it means to be a god in a world where everyone is armed to the teeth. But these ideas go nowhere. The Calypso's influence as cult leaders is never explored beyond throwaway lines. Vaults, once mythologized as galaxy-shaping mysteries, have been reduced to glorified boss arenas, though it is nice we finally get to set foot in one. The Iridians, the ancient civilization behind it all, get more screen time than ever before, and still feel like a footnote. And then there's Lilith. Her arc, at least on paper, is the closest thing the game has to a thematic throughline. A leader who loses her powers, is forced to rely on others, and ultimately sacrifices herself to stop the galactic threat. But her story is drowned out by the sheer noise of everything else. Her absence is meant to create space for others to step up, but it's hard to say the narrative earns that payoff when the people who are meant to be filling the void are so thinly written. In fairness, there are isolated successes. Tannis, despite her odd behavior, is one of the few characters who retains a consistent voice and arc. Her gradual transformation from comic relief into a competent, morally ambiguous scientist siren is believable, if underdeveloped. Vaughn, if taken in small doses, can be entertaining, and a few side quests manage to find the kind of offbeat emotional core that Borderlands 2 did so well, quirky setups that lead to surprisingly heartfelt conclusions, but these moments are sadly few and far between. Ultimately, the story in Borderlands 3 feels like it's at war with itself. It wants to be irreverent, but also epic. It wants to mock heroism, but also indulge in it. It wants the player to care, but refuses to take anything seriously long enough for that to happen. It's not just a misfire, it's a narrative that actively disrespects its own stakes. Once the credits roll and the calypsos are no more, Borderlands 3 opens into a sprawling endgame focused on progression, repeatable content, and stat optimization. While the core loop remains intact, a handful of new systems help extend the grind, at least for players who are already bought in. The most immediate addition is True Vault Hunter mode, the series version of New Game Plus, returning from older entries. It lets you replay the story with all your gear and levels intact, against tougher enemies with improved loot drops. It's functionally identical to the base campaign, but tuned for efficiency and farming, making it a serviceable, if predictable, replay option. Far more significant is Mayhem mode, a scaling difficulty system that dramatically boosts enemy health and damage while increasing loot quality. As you climb through Mayhem levels, running from level 1 to 11, playing it lets you unlock access to Mayhem exclusive gear and modifiers. The higher the level, the more effects will be in play, but these aren't always effects that make the game harder. Early versions of the system leaned on chaotic random effects, like low gravity or exploding enemies, that often disrupted gameplay flow. Later updates added some customization, but higher Mayhem levels still rely heavily on damage scaling, which tends to favor min-maxed builds over creativity or adaptability. All loot dropped will be allocated to that tier of Mayhem, and it basically functions as a streamlined version of the second game's overpower mechanic. Running parallel to this is Guardian rank, an account-wide progression system that expands on Borderlands 2's Badass rank. It's split into 3 branches: Enforcer, Survivor, and Hunter, each offering small persistent stat bonuses. Over time, players unlock Guardian perks, passive abilities like ammo regeneration or stronger second winds. While it adds long-term depth, its pacing can feel slow, especially when paired with Mayhem's escalating grind. The game also features Iridian trials, themed combat gauntlets tied to traits like agility or discipline. Each trial ends with a boss fight, but despite their setup, they feel more like optional diversions than must-play content. Loot incentives are modest, and the structure lacks enough mechanical depth to compete with comparable endgame content in other looter shooters. Side quests also gain new relevance post-story, particularly those skipped during the main campaign. Some feature sharper writing and tighter design than anything in the main plot, often delivering fun bosses, strong loot, and more restrained humor. They're not always essential, but they help flesh out the world in a way the primary narrative struggles to. Taken together, the post-game is expansive but uneven. There's no shortage of things to do, between True Vault Hunter mode, Mayhem, Guardian rank, trials, and side missions, but the emphasis stays squarely on stat progression and loot acquisition. Still, for those who enjoy the feel of the gunplay and the loot loop, it's a well-supported endgame with plenty of room to chase perfection. Borderlands 3 launched in September of 2019 to broadly positive reviews from critics, though the enthusiasm came with caveats, many of which would grow louder in the weeks and months that followed. At launch, the consensus was clear: Gearbox had nailed the gameplay, delivering a refined, fast-paced looter-shooter experience that was mechanically superior to any previous entry in the franchise. The movement upgrades, improved gunplay, and massive arsenal of weapons were universally praised, and rightly so. On a purely functional level, Borderlands 3 was a well-oiled machine. But beyond the shooting, the response became more complicated. The most consistent criticism aimed at the game was its writing. Reviewers and players alike took issue with the narrative tone, character dialogue, and the Calypso twins in particular. What was initially marketed as a new generation of charismatic villains ended up being, in the eyes of many, shallow, obnoxious caricatures that lacked the complexity or menace of their predecessor. Ava's sudden rise in narrative importance also drew widespread backlash, with many players feeling that the game sidelined the Vault Hunter, the supposed protagonist, in favor of a character who hadn't earned that spotlight. While some appreciated the irreverent tone and humor, especially those already steeped in the franchise's sensibilities, others found the writing to be grating, dated, and unable to maintain any kind of emotional or thematic weight. This tonal dissonance undermined the story's attempts at seriousness, leaving the campaign feeling inconsistent and forgettable in comparison to its more balanced predecessor, Borderlands 2. Performance issues also plagued the initial release, particularly on PC and base consoles. Stuttering menus, long loading times, and UI lag were common complaints, especially in co-op. These issues were patched over time, but they left a sour impression early on, one that fed into broader frustrations about the game's technical polish and UI responsiveness. Another big point of controversy was Gearbox's decision to launch Borderlands 3 as a timed exclusive on the Epic Games Store for PC. This move triggered a wave of community backlash, boycotts, and general online outrage, with many PC players refusing to even purchase the game until it arrived on Steam 6 months later, including me. While the exclusivity deal didn't harm sales in the long term, it did cloud the game's launch window with unnecessary PR baggage and rekindled the ongoing debate over PC storefront fragmentation. Despite these issues, Borderlands 3 was a commercial success, selling over 5 million copies within its first 5 days. Metacritic average is still sitting in the low 80s range, with most reviews highlighting the excellent combat, deep customization, and impressive world variety. The shortcomings were clear, but so were the strengths. In the years since, player sentiment has softened somewhat, particularly in light of the game's strong post-launch support. The 4 major DLCs were generally well received, praised for their focused storytelling, creative mission design, and tighter tone. For many, the expansions delivered the kind of narrative competence that the base game lacked, and helped reframe Borderlands 3 as a flawed but ultimately rewarding experience. Still, the game's reputation remains split. For those who came for the loot and stayed for the class variety, Borderlands 3 delivered in spades. For those hoping for another iconic story with memorable characters and a charismatic villain, it fell disappointingly flat. Speaking of DLCs, I'll cover those next time on Zaniverse. Thanks for watching to the end of this video. If you enjoyed, do all the YouTube things, and be sure to keep your eyes peeled for when I drop the second part in a few weeks' time. I've been Zaniverse, and I'll be back soon enough.